Thank you very much for this invitation. And I'm honored to be delivering this lecture. Now, let me begin by saying that given the time constraint I have, maybe I didn't choose the topic very intelligently because it's quite vast. But in a way, there are two aspects to it. One is class and another is 21st century India. So in a way, somewhat looking at the future. So I don't know how far I'll be able to get to it, because as far as I organize this lecture, there are few methodological issues which I'll be focusing on, and then if time permits, maybe I'll enter into some other aspects related to the Indian context. This is well, it's the machine, I can't do anything. Okay, so anyway, let me start with the notion of class first of all. It's completely wrong to think that class is a concept which is relevant only to Marxian theory. Class has been used as a concept for a long time. Class was not something that was kind of conceptualized by Marx or anybody. It had pre-existed his time by centuries. People have been using the word class and as an analytical tool. So it's not something that is new. And even when, Ochinda was talking about being in Riverside, or when we were students in Katakol, or even when we were students in Riverside, we were kind of getting used to usage of class in even say mainstream approaches. We were aware of these. For example, there is even a writing on class by on agriculture, I think, Eshwaran Kotwal, American Economic Review, I think, on class differentiation. You had that, and so in that respect, we also were aware of John Romer's work on class using micro-foundation, absolute standard neoclassical micro-foundational theory to theorize class formation and other things. So class is, to say that class is something that is used in an explicitly, though Romer's point is different. He belongs to one branch, at least the way he used it, claimed to be belonging to analytical Marxist school. But that's not the point. I mean, the point I'm saying is the way class has been understood and theorized has been very different, has been diverse, multivariate. In other words, if you look at the usage, if I may bring it down very quickly, the usage of class as a concept, then we find that class has been used as a noun, that is group of people. Class has been group of people. So middle class, working class as a group of people, the capitalist class as a group of people. That's quite standard way. The other is the usage of class as a process of, that is an adjective to a verb, process of something, process of ownership, process of power, process of surplus labor, which I'll be discussing. So class could be differentiated as group of people in terms of ownership, in terms of power, more or less power, elite and subaltern. That's the way also class has been used. In terms of income, high income, low income, class has been used in fact, E.P. Thompson used class even in a historical sense, consciousness sense. So there have been different usage of notion of class. So that's one thing. Class is kind of predicated on either as a group of people or as process. Second is group of people or process, but of what? So predicated on what? Now here too we find that there have been diverse usage of class, as I was trying to tell you. So class has been defined in terms of ownership. So diverse theories of class in terms of ownership, in terms of power, in terms of surplus labor, and in terms of income, status, and so on and so forth. And often these positions have clashed with one another, and I find this debate not very productive in the sense that they are often they are talking about class, claiming to be producing a class analysis, leading to different kinds of results, but actually the class theory that here they are using is quite different, hence is bound to produce different results. So class theory of, an ownership theory of class, or ownership theory of power, or a surplus labor theory of, ownership theory of class, power theory of class, and a surplus labor theory of class, they are bound to produce different kinds of analysis. So now I don't want to get into the debate of which is correct, which is wrong here, at least in this lecture. Let me stick to just one tradition which I am going to concentrate on, which is something I have been working on a lot. Not that I have not dealt with these issues, but my central focus will be on class as process. Okay. Process of surplus labor. That is the critical aspect. So by process I mean an entity in a state of change. Okay, so process around. And the object on which it is based is not ownership, power, but primarily on surplus labor. Now, why does it matter? We will see that in a minute. But here, insofar as this particular conception of class is concerned, we can go back to Karl Marx's Capital. Okay, the 3 volumes of Capital, and where Marx, and this is the work which has been done by two UMass economists, Richard Wolff and Stephen Resnick, where they read Marx, 3 volumes of Marx, and interpreted Marx's Capital, main entry point of Marx's Capital, in terms of class process of surplus labor. So surplus labor is central in Capital, Marx's book. I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Now they read it as process of surplus labor, and they named it, that's why it's an adjective to a verb, adjective to a process, as they named the process of surplus labor as class. Class as process of surplus labor, class process of surplus labor. So that is my entry point, and I am going to discuss this particular idea of class, because the rest of the conception of class, whether ownership, property, power, income, I think people have some idea of, but this one is very unique to Marx. So while Marx did not kind of discover class, he did point to us a unique theory of class, which was developed later on in the full-fledged way that I just pointed out. Now very quickly, what was the specificity of Marx's intervention and the importance of the conception of class there? So this is the book that you'll find the work discussed in this book, which Ochinda was talking about. Now here you can clearly see that Marx in Capital has a very different agenda, from other conceptions of class, other conceptions in which society is differentiated. And this is a basic distinction that I am going to make between one kind of society and another kind of society, at least the one I'm going to enter with, is in terms of who performs the surplus labor and who appropriates the surplus labor. Surplus labor can take the form of surplus, product, or surplus value. So, who produces this surplus, how is this produced, and who gets to appropriate it? That's the way in which it is done in one society is not the same it is done in another society. So, for example, the feudal, the lord and serf relation under which the surplus was performed by the serf and appropriated by the lord is very different from what we see as in the employer-employee relation, where the employer, the capitalist class, and the working class, the employee, the way surplus is performed there and appropriate. But before going that, a few words, and I'm really, since time constraint, so it's a snapshot view I'm giving you, not a detailed analysis. So I'm going to give you a snapshot view of how Marx is bringing into operation this idea of surplus labor or class process of surplus labor. Henceforth, I call it only class. So by class now, for the rest of the lecture, I mean class process of surplus labor. How did Marx introduce this as a point of departure from the classical political economy? What was really Marx's intervention? Not that this was the only intervention, but since the object of our talk is this, that's what I'm focusing on. Now, in a very simple way, and I'm using a very broad and simplistic presentation. When we are talking about the wealth of the nation, wealth of the nation can be seen as the sum total of total labor hour multiplied by the productivity. The total labor hour multiplied by the productivity so it's 1 hour of labor capable of producing how much use values or goods and services. So how much you are going to produce is what we are roughly calling here the productivity, and that will depend upon the means of production, the quantity and quality of means of production. Now, in a way, very broadly, Marx takes this as the point of reference and departure from the classical approach, because the classical approach spent a lot of time on this aspect of labor, the division of labor, and so on and so forth, and the aspect of technology and productivity, and how they combine to create the wealth of the nation in the form of quantum of goods and services, putting it very roughly. Now, you can of course divide it, and here using it, Marx introduces for us a new conception that we can, following Marx, call it, some of you may have heard of it, forces of production. And it goes like this: if you consider just two sector, manufacturing and agriculture, then the same formulation that we have now an additional problem of allocation of resources. So the labor will be allocated between agriculture and industry, and the machine tools required again will be allocated for raw materials, machine tools, that is the means of production, will be allocated for agriculture and industry, and they will combine to produce total agricultural output, total industrial output. So you have again the wealth of nation in a way, in a more it gets more and more complex, you can take it to its logical conclusion. This combination, this is the stock Marx is taking, stock concept. Total, that is labor power, that is the minds, muscles, nerves, emotions we have to produce the goods and services, that is available to produce the goods and services in terms of the total quantum of labor, and the quantity and quality of machines and means of production, on which productivity depends. That's again, you can take it as a stock. This stock is what Marx, or following Marx's theory, typically call it the forces of production. However, I'd like to remind you to be careful about one thing. This is nothing, in my opinion, unique to Marx. You can trace this back to Smith, Ricardo, and others, who have dealt with these issues in great detail on the question of means of production and on the question of the labor power, its allocation, everything. Okay, so in details. Of course, Marx adds something new, but in what way, we will talk about it. But many people have argued that Marxian theory, or the way Marx talks about his theory, is in terms of development of forces of production. That's the unique characteristics of Marx. That is the way society develops, and this is as if Marx is arguing it, that the way society develops, and hence development idea, if you trace it back to Marx, is really rooted in the classical root, in the sense that it is about expansion of the quantity and quality of labor power and the quantity and quality of means of production. I do not agree with this, because this is nothing unique to Marx. This was already in a way contributed by was a contribution by the classical political economist. Now, here, what was Marx's unique contribution? Marx's unique contribution, in a way, and I'm going very quickly, was that Marx here argued that production is not just technologically direct. Rather, there is an aspect of social relation in production. And to focus on this social relation to production, Marx introduced what we may call the labor process. And here, he, not production process, labor process, very careful. So here, first of all, the total conceptually, labor process is again slightly different thing, but total in the labor process, that is the way labor power is using the means of production to produce goods and services, there is Marx makes two conceptual or a conceptual move, that the labor time is divided between what he calls necessary labor and surplus labor. This is where Marx introduces, and this is really where class process of surplus labor enters. Okay, enters. So, in other words, necessary labor, that is the total amount of use value that is being produced. Suppose it is taking a value form, okay, that is in money form. Part of it is returned to the one who is creating it. That is the necessary labor equivalent. That is needed to reproduce the one who is producing the use value. The other part of the labor time. So labor time is divided into two components. Okay, one part is returned, that is out of the total labor time contained in the use value. One part is returned to the producer of that good, which is his necessary labor equivalent, by which in our standard form, say in a capitalist form, in money form takes the form of wage. Okay, because it's the wage, with the wage you buy the means of subsistence, and that means of subsistence is the necessary labor equivalent. So the worker are producing, in that sense, just to make the argument, worker are producing, say, whatever they are producing, a portion of that value is returned to them, which is the necessary labor equivalent. The rest but they go on working, the rest is the surplus that they perform. That is, there is an extra labor time that they are spending. That's the surplus labor. And Marx makes surplus labor, and he was interested in this question. Okay, so that's what is happening in societies such as, and he wanted to argue that this scenario, which was there in slave system, which was there in feudal system, has appeared in a new way in the capitalist system. So that's kind of, he makes, following Resnick and Wolff, we make Marx Marx's class as the entry point of surplus labor. In volume 1, he is discussing in details, 800 pages, how surplus labor is performed and appropriated, and in volume 2 and 3 he is discussing how that is distributed and received. Okay, so he is connecting production with distribution, circulation and distribution, presenting to us an alternative conception of what an economy is. Okay, so that is the entry point of Marx's analysis. So surplus labor is simply, putting it very roughly, it's a time which is spent on work or spent in the labor process by the direct producers beyond the necessary labor time. That's the surplus labor time. Putting it very simplistic, but that will do. That's very unique to Marx, because before him or after him, I don't know of anybody who has defined class and entered and looked at or analyzed the economic structure using such a notion of class. So let's stick with it, okay, and we'll run through it as far as we can go. This surplus labor can take the form of surplus product and surplus value. Surplus product, so for example in the feudal system, you have a plot of land, the serf would work for 3 days, producing necessary labor equivalent of goods and services for himself and his family in that piece of land, and the rest of the 3 days the serf would work, and whatever crops or food grains he produced, that would be handed over to the lord. That's the surplus labor time. That takes the surplus there, takes the product form. So surplus is a form of surplus labor, material form of surplus labor, which can take a product form or a value form. In capitalist form, where it's transformed into money, mediated by money, then the surplus product takes the form of surplus value. It's much more complex, complicated, let's not enter it. Now, here Marx introduces what may be called his idea of his really important move he makes, where he defines the relations of production. And you see, what Marx is saying is, the classicals, they are not wrong. So he had great admiration for Smith and Ricardo. The classicals are not wrong. So indeed, labor, question of labor, division of labor, labor allocation, all these aspects are very important. Indeed, means of production, quantity and quality is very important. But the production is taking place under a scenario where surplus labor is performed and appropriated. Therefore, Marx connects production with the sphere of with labor process, and therefore the same equation we had, you see, relation we had. Now everything, agriculture and industry, whatever you produced of use value, accordingly had to be divided in terms of necessary labor component and the surplus labor component. Okay, so in that sense, total agricultural output or total industrial output or wealth of the nation is not just dependent on labor hour, on labor, is not just dependent on technology or productivity, but is dependent on the class process of performance and appropriation of surplus labor. Who performs it? Who performs this surplus labor? And who gets to appropriate it? That's an interesting question for Marx. Do the ones who are performing the surplus gets to appropriate it, or are they excluded from it? That's his question. Okay? So this is what Marx renames it or defines as the relations of production. And that's very unique to Marx. Okay? So that is what we are taking. For example, just to give you an example, when we look at capitalist process of production, we have a way of defining capitalist production, the way we study in standard economics. Marx redefines it in terms of unity of labor process and a process of creating value. So it's just not a process of creating use value. Okay, through that, using the labor process, that is means of production and technology. It is that and the process of creating value, right? So value, part of which is returned to one who is creating it, the rest is the surplus. The question is, for Marx, interesting question is who appropriates it, who possesses it, gets to possess it. This is a kind of discretionary fund, you know. And later on, Marx describes capitalist relation, that it is just not that, but through this, what is happening is that the relation between one who is producing the surplus and the one who is appropriating the surplus, that relation on a continual basis, which in today's context we may call employer-employee relation, gets continually produced through this production process, through these relations of production. So when following Marx, you look through the surplus labor, class process surplus labor, you look at production. You look at production in terms of unity of labor process, process of creating value, and the relation that it generates. In case of capitalist mode of capitalist class, capitalist production, it is capital relation. In case of feudal relation, feudal production, it will be feudal relation. So Marx would define, or following Marx viewed, actually, if we take it logically forward, define feudal process of production as basically defined by unity of labor process of creating surplus product, and the process and feudal relation. You know, that is lots of relation, hierarchical relation. And Marx's argument is production is vital. It is not the entire story, don't get me wrong, but you can't understand any system or any structure without this relationality in connection with production. Now, who gets to appropriate it? In the capitalist form, this is, we know, inputs and outputs are in money form, and the one who appropriates the surplus value in money form is the capitalist. Okay, and the one who appropriates and one who performs it is the worker. So Marx defines capitalist class process, very specific adjective now he gives to particular class process, as creation of surplus value through unique combination of commodity values of inputs and outputs. This appropriator can be state connected or can be private. So for example, VN is, the appropriation is basically the board of directors or the ministry. So the surplus, any surplus that is appropriated is directly appropriated by functionaries of the state. Following this, Marx did not study state capitalism, but these have been studied by us and other people, resting a note for that. Following this, we name such kinds of capitalist class process as state capitalist class process. Similarly, if the board of directors is starting the Tata group of company, the board of directors who personify the process of appropriation of surplus, they are private individuals, disconnected from state, then that class process is private capitalist class process, and the capitalists are private capitalists. Capital, by capital, Marx simply meant self-expansion of value. 100 rupees you give, which is the value of 100 rupees, you get more than the value of 100 rupees. The difference is the surplus value. We know you can generate it in finance. We know you can generate it, say banking, you give something, you get an interest. Okay, that's your dilemma, that is your surplus value. You can generate it through merchant, buying cheap, selling high. So you get the differential, okay, surplus value, extra value. What Marx was arguing, that new system has arrived, which is a production system where you can generate the same through production. Self-expansion of value. You start with 100 rupees. You buy labor power and means of production with 100 rupees. You produce the commodity and sell the commodity in the market for more than 100 rupees, say 105. This 100 to 105 difference is the surplus value. And the capitalist This is Marx's definition of capital, self-expansion of value. Now, just note one thing. Marx hardly uttered the word capitalism in Capital. In the book Capital, he hardly uttered the word capitalism. He used capital, capitalist, capitalist class, working class, capitalist, production process, relations of production. Ever use the word? I don't remember actually using the word capitalism. It's very careful actually. Let us move now. So, now we leave Marx, we go forward 100 years down the line, coming to the present time. We define a particular theory, our version of theory, which is very different. You can call it Marxian theory or whatever, it doesn't matter. It basically says that it's the study of the relations between class and non-class processes. So Marx, if you are going to say everything depends on class, that's class determinism. Hardly so, that explains nothing actually. So far as that's the entry point of Marx as the analysis, which we are using. However, this occurs in mutual relation with other non-class processes. By non-class process, we mean any process other than performance, appropriation, distribution, and receipt of surplus labor. So, any other process is a non-class process. It could be other economic process. So, market process is a non-class process. It could be a cultural process. Okay, so production of meanings, advertisements could produce and disseminate meanings. That's a cultural process. Political process. So supervision or putting up the CCTV camera and seeing how work is being done. That's a political process and natural process. And I'll spend a little bit of time on that. In the contemporary context. This relation of mutual. This is another way Marx differentiates, or this theory, not Marx, this theory I am putting forward differentiates itself from other class theory, which is that it never reduces any analysis or description to only class. It is not only about class, but rather it says class and non-class processes are in mutual relation to one another. Each is the cause and effect of one another. So in that sense, it's captured it's actually a terminology borrowed from Sigmund Freud in interpretation of dreams called overdetermination. And so this is another way to look at it. And Marx would look at the relation between how class and non-class processes are related to one another. Okay. Let me first of all get right into, as far, whatever time permits, I'll go. Even with this simple thing, a few questions, a few problems we can say that we can trace it down to the contemporary time. Okay, in terms of the problems that can be, thought of in terms of the framing. Because this frame, I remember a great French philosopher, Louis Althusser, once said that in a conflictual reality, you can't see everything from everywhere. You just can't see everything from everywhere. To see certain things, you have to occupy certain positions. So if you occupy the position of class, and if you occupy the position of overdetermination, that is, each is the cause and effect of one another, this idea of relationality, you will see certain things which ideally would not be captured by other interpretations, or even if captured, they would not be the same interpretations. Okay, so some of these aspects which are unique, which are there, I'm pointing out very contemporary problems and I'm rushing through them, but which are there, okay, in the contemporary times. First is, and this has been discussed a lot, that mode, when we come to the mode of appropriation. Now, going very quickly here, don't worry about this, I will go. That the mode of appropriation, the first term, is very crucial. Okay, and for 150 years, people have dealt with it. Okay, so it's a known literature. That is, how surplus labor is performed and how it is appropriated. Who appropriates? One way is what can be called exploitative. Exploitative simply means that those who have performed the surplus labor are excluded from the process of its appropriation. It is done by non-performers, non-doers, by somebody else. This exploitation has been considered wrong, has been debated about. I don't want to spend time on it. The other is, of course, non-exploitation. Non-exploitation transpires when the one who is performing the surplus labor is also the one who is appropriating the surplus labor. So there is no class division. In other words, in case class division here is not a distributional matter. Class division, it is a distributional matter. But Marx following Marx, that is our interpretation or argue, class division also pertains to what happens in the hidden adobe of production. That is, in the hidden adobe of production, in the relations of production, there is one group who performs the surplus labor, gets the necessary, who performs, creates use values, gets portion of it as the necessary labor equivalent. The rest of the quantum of use value or value that they produce is appropriated by somebody else. So there is a division, a schism between two two groups. So in that sense, class inequality, I don't say class division, yes, but class inequality occurs right in the domain of production itself, in the way we have defined production. Okay. If it is exploitation. Non-exploitation is where this division is eradicated. Class does not disappear, but this division is no longer there because one who is performing the surplus labor is also the one who is appropriating. There is no exclusion. So class division doesn't exist. Self-appropriation is where this surplus labor is performed singularly, individually. We know lot of situation around here. Okay, self-employed or somebody individually. Creating a wealth, part of it keeps for oneself, the rest is the surplus that has to be produced and distributed. Why? We need not bother with it. This is called self-appropriation because there is nobody else. The self, himself or herself on his or her own is the performer and appropriator of surplus labor, the surplus labor that they produce. These are the three modes. So modes of appropriation of surplus and exploitation are not the same. They need not be collapsed to one another. Okay, different societies and different possibilities emerge. Different possibilities emerge. That is, you can change the possibility of society among other things by changing the class structure. That is, changing the way the mode of production is articulated. You can move it from exploitative to non-exploitative, or have a combination, more a diverse combination of the three. All these kinds of possibilities are. Alright, coming to this contemporary problem. So exploitation has been considered as unjust. Okay. And I need not, this has been a long discussion for 150 years. Different people have, since the time it was invoked, have discussed this. I am not going to spend any time on it, except to say one of the argument has been that exploitation is wrong for what it is. That is, it excludes. It excludes the direct performance from the process of the appropriation of surplus. So you need not have any further argument other than say that it is wrong by virtue of what it is. Okay. So that is one argument. I'm not going to spend any time. The other point is, which has been discussed a lot in contemporary times, is income and wealth inequality. Okay. Income and wealth inequality. Now, there's huge literature and very rich literature, and I don't want to enter into it. All that we can say that the class dimension, in the way I have proposed it, would add is that this income and wealth inequality, which pertains in a way to distribution, redistribution and other aspects, is also connected to production. I just now talked about class inequality. that is inequality in the domain of production. And the argument would be that this is vehemently Marx and later on those who followed that tradition make the argument that is, you cannot fundamentally correct for income and wealth inequality unless you correct for class inequality. Therefore, unless you connect the domain of inequality in distribution with the domain of inequality in the production sphere, then you are not going to solve the problem of inequality. So that's a major, as you can see from our analysis, a take which is being discussed a lot now in the Marxist literature. The other issue, which again we all of us are aware of, and many of us have grown through it, is the problem of instability, business. Now I want to put my foot down and say that long before Keynes opened this idea of instability, business cycle and macroeconomy, Marx, in my view, actually there could have been others before him, I don't know actually, is in my opinion the first who presented a systemic theory of business cycle of capitalism. That is, as you can see, this is from volume 1 in Marx, that why capitalism, and volume 2 and 3 actually discusses this in great details, why it moves in this cycle of moderate activity, prosperity, overproduction, crisis and stagnation in cycles. In other words, this is something that we have particularly grown through, all of us, these periodic cycles. And Marx has a unique take on it. Okay, and this is again part of the discussion that is happening in the present time. Marx has a unique take on it because he analyzes this. So his idea is not the Keynesian one or the classical approach that we know of business cycle. His idea of studying business cycle was connecting class process of surplus labor with the capitalist economy, the rest of the economy, distribution, rest of the economy. So capital, in other words, technology plays a very important role. So here, for example, when Marx is discussing capitalist relations of production, his capitalist economy, in his book Capital, he takes into account all of these, which we know are contemporary points of discussion, very important ideas we have got from all the three, division of labor, market, competition thing, innovation, productivity. But how would Marx or a theory such as a class-focused economy proceed? By connecting it with class process of surplus labor, with performance, appropriation, distribution and receipt of surplus labor, and seeing how each is the cause and effect of one another. It is through this methodology, this different methodology, that Marx argues that there is a fundamental instability or disorder in capitalism, that it is never stable. It is not a stable partner. Okay? It is not a stable partner to live with, as it is. So this is a very important point again, especially after 2007-8 crisis, a return of huge interest in Marx's work, because people saw that he had something different to say. So there has been a big discussion, a continuing discussion actually in the field of Marxism as well as other areas. The next part is alienation. Marx had discussed about alienation from in the process of, and this I am discussing mainly capital and talking about. Okay? Alienation from product, that is the surplus, the one who is producing the use value doesn't get access to the use value. It is appropriated in a capitalist economy by the non-doers. So alienation from the product, alienation from the surplus value because they are excluded from it, alienation of human relation, and so on and so forth. Different kinds of alienations. These are again part of the discussion. I don't want to enter into. Fourth is again something that we are living through actually. That is, as the expansion, as this capitalist economy grows, what we are calling the capitalist economy, as it grows, that is, this capitalist class process, non-class process expands its way. You have what we call the expropriation of peasants, artisans, and other aspects, So creating the mass of labor power. Again and again, newer kinds of labor power who have nothing to sell but their labor power as a commodity. So labor power, the commodification of labor power as a continuous process. So further argument of this class focus economy is that connecting it, all of these are connected to the methodology. Class connected to the functioning of the capitalist economy, that it is built on force and violence. It is integral to it. Fourth is the surplus population. Again, for the younger people, they are more and more aware of it now. Okay, Marx again talks that it is impossible for capitalist economy to take into account all of the population. So the rest of the labor force will be out. And given the technological progress, you would expect that the number of people who would be inside the capitalist economy, that would decline over a period of time. So it's a big discussion again. These are all major discussions happening now all over the world, worldwide discussion. Fourth is economic democracy, which is, there is political democracy, we know. But is there democracy inside the firm? That is, in how we produce goods and services. What, where, who will produce goods and services? Is there participation in the production of goods and services? Okay, that's again a big line of discussion that is happening in the present time. In fact, alternative organizational structure are being discussed. Alternative enterprises are being discussed, where the enterprise would be recomposed in a different way, where democracy, economic democracy would be taken seriously. This is a serious argument made by people like Richard Wolff in their book Democracy at Work, where they make the argument that we are spending most of our adult life, productive life, we spend working. And we spent working in a completely non-democratic environment, where we are directed at what to produce, how to produce, who will produce, where it will be produced, and so on and so forth. So, in other words, the discussion we have of political democracy needs to be brought into the discussion of why not have a discussion on democracy inside the place where we spend most of our waking hours of our life. This is the argument that they are making. Finally, because I had actually a lot of things to discuss, but this is the final. This is the final, because Achinda has given me this dictate. Just perhaps one more thing I'll say, and then I'll just shift, because there are a lot of things. But this is very important in the present context. Okay, we know about Earth system, planetary crisis. Now, many of you are, think that perhaps a class-focused approach following the work of Marx, in the tradition of Marx, not Marx. Marx did not do all of that, but following that tradition, that he had nothing to say on nature, nothing good to say on ecology. It's all about labor exploitation, and so on and so forth. That's completely wrong. I may put it that way. Volume 3 particularly discusses, and this is Marx's great battle. And he actually learns in inorganic chemistry, agricultural chemistry, because he wanted to know about land. He studied villages in Russia, villages in Algeria, villages in his later part is not industrial Europe. Completely later part is on. In fact, we have a writing on it, our own writing, 2 years or 1 year before he died, on a village in Bengal. So we have in fact an essay, Bangla Marx, okay, on a village in Bengal, detailed description. He kept notes of the agricultural prices, the input prices, and so on, notebook, which are These are all now coming out actually, because these were there. And there's been an explosion. These are some of the literature I'm pointing out. I'll just point out what it is, but these are some of the literature which have traced the source of ecology in Marx's Capital and other writings actually, and connected it to class and this framing that I talked about. And this is a new area which is known as eco-socialists. They just don't call themselves socialists. Some of them are fiercely anti-historical materialism. Many of you think historical materialism is the only Marxist approach. Class-focused approach is not historical materialism, it's a different approach. K.E.R. Saito's work is opposed to historical materialism. He's been one of the in the forefront. His last book, Marx in the Anthropocene, which is the new geological age, as some are saying, we have entered into climate crisis and so on, is a bestseller in Japan, which has sold over 1 million copies. Okay, so you're talking about a book on Marx selling in Japan. So these are very important events taking place in this frame all over the world. Okay, not necessarily just in this frame, but this aspect of Earth system crisis. So what did they find out? What was there that was in Marx that they found out? It's impossible for me to summarize it. You can look at Saito's book, Foster's book. All of these deal with this in detail, excruciating detail. Marx's interaction with great scientists like Liebig and others, father of inorganic chemistry. So, and then Marx's argument was, putting it very in a nutshell, I mean, I'm doing injustice actually, but still, just to give you the idea, that nature, so he was fiercely opposed to the anthropomorphic approach. In other words, capitalism means taking an anthropomorphic approach, that is where you are using nature for human gains. Okay, so there is this human nature schism and your division, and you are using nature for human gains. In a way, one of the most important event of enlightenment, that enlightenment made this philosophy possible. Birth of political economy, birth of what we call the scientific revolution, and so on and so forth. We don't enter into it. But Marx is fiercely opposed to this side, the anthropomorphic approach, the man-centric or the human-centric approach vis-a-vis nature. He sees nature as an inorganic body of human, extension of human. Okay, so in other words, you're part and parcel of one another. And he calls this metabolic interaction. Metabolism. So he takes it from science, you can see that. Metabolism is a scientific term. He takes it from the field of science, brings it here. He calls it metabolic interaction. That for ages, since human beings have been there, and this is a transcendental kind of, it has always been there. You have had a metabolic interaction between human and nature, where each is reproduced the other, at least in the what from today's context we know the Holocene age. Since human civilization has come into being in the modern form. So even in slave and feudal form, he would argue, the metabolic interaction was maintained. That is, nature was not used for human gains, explicitly, which is our utilitarian approach, you see. Our birth and our, bread and butter is based on it. Nature was not turned into resource. And if you don't have nature as resource, you can't have capital. So one of the great things about enlightenment was it transformed the idea of nature into resource. So that it's an inert matter, now you can exploit it for human gains. So anyway, I don't want to interrupt. So for him, what he argued is that capitalism created a rift. That's one of his critiques. It created a rift between the human and nature. Part of his argument on alienation also. It created a rift between human and nature, an irreparable rift. That is, this cannot be corrected in this system because the system is geared for, I define the capitalist production process, generation of surplus value and the capitalist relation. So, in other words, to extract nature and create surplus value. And so, in that respect, he says, Bellamy Foster later on defined it as metabolic rift. In his own work, he said this argument of Marx, I am defining it as a metabolic rift. That instead of metabolic interaction, what this system has produced is a systemic problem, a metabolic rift. And these fellows, they have, and actually you can look at, this quote of Marx. This is the end of volume 3. You can see the next quote, as you can see, he's very clear. He's kind of summarizing his argument. And Capital, in that sense, is not just a book on dehumanization of labor, as we may put it that way. It's a book also, as he argues, ruination of nature. Okay, and he argues these two are connected. That as you move from industrialization to capitalization of agriculture, the soil, and that's his interest on soil, the soil and so on and so forth, the forest and everything, So it lays to waste and ruins all these, the two dimensions. So he brings nature in direct connection to the class process or the capitalist class process, and analyzes how each is the cause and effect of one another. And in this respect, these eco-socialists have kind of argued that they have taken the argument of this idea of Marx to the present, deforestation, acidification, oceanification, all these things we are seeing now. They have, in their own analysis now, some of them are scientists, they have taken the argument, this idea, insight of Marx, forward actually. And the argument has been that again, if you want to save, if you are really serious about saving human species, humans as a species, or human species as a species, then you cannot live with capitalism. You have to move beyond capitalism. Okay, because there is the problem is systemic. No amount of green capitalism or other kinds of moves would correct for this kind of systemic form. This is just what they are saying. Okay, I'm just reporting. I'll finish it just by making the final observation, and I have not even partly begun what I have done in some of my own work. The only thing I'd like to say is, I have only here discussed capital, part of it, capital's problem and capital. But the point is, even if you take class process of surplus labor, just that, performance of surplus labor and appropriation of surplus labor, then what you get are diverse, even here in this time, space, moment that we have at the present time, all different kinds of class structures, diverse kinds of class structures. And these diverse kinds, I'm not going to go into detail, we don't have time. These diverse kinds of class structures have been analyzed, as you can see here, as independent class process, capitalist class process, feudal class process, slave class process, community class process, independent class process. These again exist in overdetermined relation with other non-class processes. In fact, my work, at least I can tell you, part of what I have done is I have flattened the Indian economy, disaggregated the Indian economy to argue that it is just not about capitalism. It has all diverse kinds of economic structure. And of course the importance, capitalism is important. Capitalism is important as a hegemonic form. That how one of these forms, capitalist, become the dominant one. So the economy is decentered and disaggregated, diverse, but one among them become the dominant force. First of all, in pre-planning state capitalism, In the, which we call state capitalism, in the post-planning, we call private capitalism. Okay. Ism stands for a bigger form, a hegemonic form. So it's just not capitalist economic structure we are talking about, more than that actually. So this, just to finish off the argument, this is, I'm ending, by the way, Sir Mokale. This actually is a paper by Ajit Chaudhary and Anjan Chakrabarti in 2000. So I'm taking it from that part. I should be very careful because I'm ending with Gibson Graham's piece. So I should also tell you about some of our teachers. You know, they have done some of these works long time back actually. So this is just an ending. We know about the iceberg. Okay, we know about the iceberg. And this is in a way Marx's critique of capital. He calls it delusional appearance of reality. That's what he calls it. That reality is much more complex than this. Much more complex than capitalist economy. Capitalist economy, in a way, is captured by what? Inputs and outputs in money form, that is wage labor and produce for a market, and where mode of appropriation takes surplus value. So that's what we are identifying it as capitalist economy. And if you look at the rest, what is the economic activities that are happening all around? Innumerable number of economic activities happening around, including different kinds of other class processes. Okay. So the iceberg, when you look at the iceberg, what do you see? The tip. And you conflate the tip of the iceberg as the iceberg. The Titanic collapsed, right? Because of that. The tip of the iceberg as the iceberg. That's a delusion. That's a delusion. So when you're reducing the complex economic structure, even by just taking the simple thing of class process, appropriation performance, you can see the diverse class process. Even there, if you reduce it to only one form, which is the capitalist one, just the capitalist one, you are really, when you are studying the economy, you are studying the tip of the iceberg. And you are conflating the tip of this iceberg with the iceberg itself, which is the complex study of all of this. So some of the things that we have done is, as I told you, has been trying to move from hegemonic form to showing the Indian economy as decentered and disaggregated, different kind of landscape of the Indian economy that we have been presenting. So I'll stop here because it is already, but I have only gone 40% because I wanted to cover a lot. I was confused actually, but that's all okay. All right. I think we'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjan. It was really wonderful talk, and I wish we could give you more time, and you could show all the 40% of your slides. And so we need another session to complete this thing. You must have seen that Anjan's work is very different from the kind of work that we usually come across in lectures and seminars. And it's a very different kind of work, and he must be congratulated for having pursued this for long. He has been pursuing this for long. I have a lot of admiration for Anjan for that, and you could see the passion. He's so passionate about what he does, and so a couple of things that maybe we can think about takeaways from his presentation. The first is that our standard notion that classes are groups of people, and he moves away from that. Classes are not groups of people. Classes should be seen as class processes. That's the first one. What is the advantage of looking at that? I mean, saying in this way, the advantage is that the same person can be a performer, can be For instance, I'm a worker and I have invested in stock market. So I'm a capital owner. So class-wise, who am I? Am I a capitalist or I'm a worker? So I work and my savings, I invest in the stock market. So you see that this kind of complexity you can capture with class processes rather than class as groups of people. So a lot of people confuse Marxism just saying that as if Marx said that classes are groups of people. That's the first entry point. That's great. And I'm not going to explain the rest of the things. Towards the end, what he said, that's remarkable. That is I would say that this is one trajectory from Marx that we have taken, which has extremely contemporary relevance. The contemporary relevance of this is that this metabolic rift. Now, many people are talking about this metabolic rift, particularly those who are working in the area of ecology. A lot of scientists, they are working on that and they're drawing on Marx now. So the pure scientists, they are drawing on Marx just to see that these ideas, how these ideas can be here applied, saying that, well, what are the things that are there in the capitalist class process which actually are leading to this kind of metabolic rift. Now that's another that opens up the future possibilities, the future politics as well. So I must thank Anjan for giving us this lot of food for thought. And Anjan, thank you very much for taking your time off and spending this time here. And so now, if you have, so we can take a few questions because we still have some time. So maybe we can spend 5 to 10 minutes on questions, and then we'll distribute the awards. That won't take much time, distribution of awards. So maybe we can take 10 minutes for discussion. Yeah, 10.